Hello, puppies and kittens, and welcome to another episode of Blasphemers Bible. We're on to Leviticus 21, and now we're into the rules for the priests. Maybe now you think that they skipped that one rule that didn't come up in all the rules regarding prohibited sex. They never said anything about screwing children, but surely here in the rules for the priest, that's going to come up, right?
I'm skeptical.
You wish.
Priests not fucking kids. I mean, maybe in Bizarro land.
All right, so we got off on the right foot there. Any opening announcements?
I believe that tomorrow Ember is having a certain thing.
Yeah, Lorence might be involved. Lorence is stopping by my channel to come talk about his project with Milwaukee Atheists, what he's up to, what he's hoping to accomplish. What time did we say for that? 7:30 your time?
Yeah, 7:30. Yeah.
Yeah.
And what time is it for you now, Lorence? As a
5.
point of reference, it's 5. So 2 hours from now, but tomorrow. Good.
Yep, that's about right. Yep.
7:30 Central, if anybody wants to do the math.
Only Tomer.
Of course.
Oh, yes.
Okay.
Well,
So,
rules for
who's
priests.
reading today?
Whose turn is it?
I haven't done it in a while.
Fine.
Maybe Ember. Yeah. Maybe Ember should.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I could finish this chapter. It's 24 verses.
Cool. All right. Chapter 21. The Lord said to Moses, "Speak to the priests, the sons of Aaron, and say to them, a priest must not make himself ceremonially unclean for any of his people who die, except for a close relative, such as his mother or father, his son or daughter, his brother, or an unmarried sister who is dependent on him since she has no husband, for her he may make himself unclean. He must not make himself unclean for people related to him by marriage, and so defile himself. Priests must not shave their heads or shave off the
Obligatory
edges of their
mother-in-law
beards.
joke.
Or cut their bodies. They must be holy to their God, and must not profane the name of their God, because they present the food offerings to the Lord, the food of their God. They are to be holy. They must not marry women defiled by prostitution or divorce from their husbands, because priests are to be holy to their God. Regard them as holy, because they offer up the food of your God. Consider them holy, because I, the Lord, am holy, I who make you holy. If a priest's daughter defiles herself by becoming a prostitute, she disgraces her father. She must be burned in fire. The high priest, the one among his brothers who has had the anointing oil poured on his head, and who has been ordained to wear the priestly garments, must not let his hair become unkempt or tear his clothes. He must not enter a place where there is a dead body. He must not make himself unclean, even for his father or mother.
Wait. A priest may not enter a place where there's a dead body.
Yes.
Yep.
What's the only thing priests do?
Weddings,
Well,
funerals.
they sacrifice things.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Details.
well, technically, if you compare it to the priest's daughter, it appears they burn her alive. So, does that really count as a dead body once you're ashes? I don't know.
Well, if you're
I was
the
going to
one
give
who
last
makes
rites,
it
but he's already dead. So, see ya.
Right? Yeah, if you're the one who makes the things dead, perhaps it doesn't count.
Please continue.
Okay, we're on 12. Nor leave the sanctuary of his God or desecrate it, because he has been dedicated by the anointing oil of his God. I am the Lord. The woman he marries must be a virgin. He must not marry a widow, a divorced woman, or a woman defiled by prostitution, but only a virgin from his own people, so that he will not defile his offspring among his people. I am the Lord who makes him holy. The Lord said to Moses, say to Aaron, for the generations to come, none of your descendants who has a defect may come near to offer the food of his God. No man who has any defect may come near. No man who is blind or lame, disfigured or deformed. No man with a crippled foot or hand, or who is a hunchback or a dwarf, or who has any eye defect, or who has a festering or running sores or damaged testicles. No descendant of Aaron, the priest, who has any defect is to come near to present the food offerings to the Lord. He has a defect. He must not come near.
Put me
to the
right off
food.
my lunch.
Right?
I see that gimpy hand and I can't eat.
Yep. The aroma is not pleasing to the Lord. He must not come near to the offer the food of his God. He may eat the most holy food of his God, as well as the holy food, yet because of his defect, he must not go near the curtain or approach the altar and so desecrate my sanctuary. I am the Lord who makes them holy. So Moses told this to Aaron and his sons and to all the Israelites.
You know, so often we're repulsed and horrified by God's racism and homophobia and sexism and cruelty, and we forget he's ableist too.
And he's body shaming.
Yeah, well, I mean, really, that's kind of a given at this point. I swear, this is why I put out the challenge last week on Twitter. Name any vile thing, any human rights violation, any crime against the Geneva Conventions, war crime, any truly evil act, and I will find you in the Bible where God did it or directly commanded it.
Yep.
Wasn't hard.
Okay, I'll start with verse 1. For any of his people who die, in Hebrew it's lenefesh. The word nefesh could also designate soul or person, according to BDB Dictionary. Milgrom notes that the Aramaic napsha and nefesh in Rabbinic Hebrew designate a gravestone or a funerary monument. The word be'amav, translated to for any of his people, could either denote for his skin, according to Bechosho, from the priestly group, according to Rashbam, from Israel, according to Ibn Ezra, or in his nation, according to the Septuagint, Samaritan text, and Targums.
Point of clarification. I know that Jewish priests don't perform last rites. That's obviously a Catholic thing. What rites or ceremonies do they perform for the dead, typically?
The dead? They don't, because they're not allowed to approach a dead person.
But do they run the funeral?
No, they're not allowed to go to them.
They're not allowed to go to funerals.
They're not allowed to go to. Yeah, nope. They're not
Only
allowed to go to
only
graveyards.
these close relatives I mentioned.
That are listed.
I think there is a designated place.
I mean, maybe
for
they can go to a
priests. funeral,
but they definitely can't go to the cemetery.
I
But
think
who's going to sprinkle the blood all over everything?
Verse
You have to
2.
sprinkle the blood before the dead people show up?
Where do you get the blood? You get the blood from the dead, right?
Well, no, but dead animals. I mean, you could take the
Yeah.
dead animal, sprinkle it on a sheet, have the family cover the dead person in the sheet, and by the transitive property of blood magic holiness, you bless the dead person.
Okay.
Verse 2, a close relative. Hebrew Bible literally reads, his closest flesh, she'ero hakarov. Chazal in the Sifra and Talmud Yevamot 22b interpret she'ero to mean his wife. Milgrom, however, citing Aaron ben Joseph the Karite, writes that if it was the case, then it should have been immediately followed by his mother.
Jewish boys and their mothers and their long-suffering wives.
Toma, this is your mother.
How
So
could
who-
you leave
so
me for that little shiksa?
So who's the most holy relative? Yo mama.
Verse 3, Levine comments, the sister is close until she marries and goes to live with her husband's family. Then presumably there would be others to attend to her burial. According to the Sifra, even a betrothed woman who still resides in her father's household is considered close. The idiom asher lo hayta leishla, who has never belonged, quote unquote, to a man, refers to the legal status of a woman in marriage and to sexual union in marriage.
Yeah, so that kind of covers the stuff we talked about with with Leviticus 18, how because translating as she has not become a man's, verse 3 there, at least according to Alter. Yeah, it's the same principle overlies it or underlies it, whatever.
Yeah, I mean, it's standard. What I've been complaining about very loudly for a while. Women as property whose only value is in a hymen. And if that is, the broken goods, they can be indiscriminately murdered if no one wants to keep them.
Verse 4, for people related to him by marriage. In Hebrew, it's Baal be'amav. The exact meaning of this phrase is not clear. Targum Onkelos renders Baal as master, based on Exodus 21, verses 3 and 28, and 22:7. And so it reads, a master among his people. The Septuagint reads, suddenly, possibly from Tebala in Numbers 4:20, which indicates quickness or suddenness. Milgrom, citing Paran, proposes that Baal should be deleted as a partial dictography, i.e., an accidental repetition of a letter or word of Be'amav.
Yeah, so Alter also cites Paran there. So he says that literally it means a master or husband among his kin, but the various attempts to make this intelligible are strained, as been pointed out by several scholars, that elsewhere Baal is always used either as part of a collocation or in a declined form, so just like a different case. This translation adopts Paran's plausible proposal that the received text reflects the dictography.
Verse 5, Milgrom comments, shedding tear and hair awards honors to the dead, as seen in Homer Odyssey 4.197. On the death of their leader, Persians cut off their hair and that of their animals, as seen in Herod 9:24. Locks of hair were placed on the bier, corpse, or tomb. It was customary for pre-Islamic Arabs to deposit their shorn hair at a tomb of a reverend saint. An analogy persists in the custom of present-day Hasidim who pilgrimaged to Meron in the Galilee on Lag BaOmer in order to cut their children's hair for the first time at the purported tomb of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. The purpose of cutting hair for the dead is most likely the same as that of the well-attested donation of hair to the sanctuary. Since hair continues to grow throughout life and appears to do so for a time after death, it was considered by the ancients to be the seat of a man's vitality and life force, and in ritual it often served as his substitute. End quote. Milgrom suggests that Israel's priests, and H in particular, intended on eradicating the pervasive cult of the dead, and so would have spared no effort to instill the notion that these mourning rites were forbidden by God.
Interestingly, that actually reminded me of something. So I've been reading a lot of Mesopotamian texts recently, not in Mesopotamian, right? I don't know that, but so there's a text called the Sargon Geography, and it's essentially where Sargon of Akkad outlines like all of his domain, which is essentially everything. He even says that he goes far beyond like the far beyond the sea that encircles the earth. But there is a section here where it said, Kazina, which is above it, whose hairstyle is chosen with a razor, devoured by fire, who do not know burial. So the commentary from Horowitz says that the second half of it, whose hairstyle is chosen with a razor, presumably refers to a people who shaved at least part of their head instead of letting their hair grow long like Assyrians. So yeah, I mean, you already mentioned how in the Iliad that was a practice for mourning, and that is very much true. There are a whole bunch of like Greek mourning practices, but we can also see that this one it could also be related to a mourning practice because it says that who do not know burial at the end of it. So yeah, so it's interesting how deep that goes. But yeah,
Perhaps they burned their dead.
Yeah, maybe.
I mean, there are other ways to dispose of a body than burial or burning, but those do seem to be the two most popular, largely in cultures. But cutting the hair for the dead, as a a mark of grief or a sign of remembrance, whether it's a portion of hair or all the hair at a certain level, is something that seems to be pretty universal. Indigenous cultures in the Americas do that. Lots of different peoples, particularly those who hold their hair as something sacred, vital, with spiritual significance, will, under certain circumstances, as a sign of great respect and or mourning, cut their hair. So this seems to be a pretty universal human meme that they're forbidding because those
Actually,
icky followers of that other god did it.
Actually, in Judaism, it's the opposite. You actually have to grow a beard for 3 months.
Oh,
It's probably to
How do
distinguish
they
them from people who cut
How do
their
they justify having a beard all the time anyway?
Yeah, that's
Oh, the whole
I
like
think
not
religious
trimming your beard
Jews-
prohibition.
Religious Jews will grow their hair out. They won't get a haircut for the first 3 months of mourning.
when you say
The
grow it
first
out for
year.
3 months, do you like shave it to have a fresh start and then have a 3 months growth and that's your mourning beard? Or
No. It's just like you don't groom for 3 months. So if you're not religious and you trim your beard or you shave or whatever, they'll normally grow it because it's like more important. And if you're religious, you'll just see like their hair will get unkept. It's not like that obvious.
so they must not let his hair become unkempt or tear his clothes, because the tearing of clothes and residing in sackcloth and ashes is definitely a
Yeah,
sign
it
of
is-
mourning or repentance.
It is also
through the Bible.
acceptable in Judaism to tear off a cloth.
Yeah. So so it's like different steps. So when a relative dies, you're supposed to tear like the top layer of your clothing or whatever it is. For the first 7 days, you don't sit on a high chair. You sit shiva for the 7 days, right? But you sit on a low chair, and there's some other certain things you do as well. First 3 months, you don't groom and stuff. And the first year, you don't go to weddings and you don't listen to music. And I think there's some other rules as well for like a mourner.
And why do you
parent
not
dies.
groom or go to weddings?
It's a
Because
sign
we're
of
in
mourning.
mourning.
Okay.
So this could also be related. So you know how the next section talks about if you're somehow deformed, that is you can't go into the temple, right? So the idea here might kind of be the same, right? Because if you are somehow maiming a part of yourself, that being like your beard, for example, then that would be kind of related. It'd be disfiguring yourself in a way. So that might be related. I don't know.
I suppose I could see that. Like if the Sikhs, for example, will not remove a single hair from their head or body because they consider all of their body holy. So, cutting a Sikh's hair against their will would be considered a hate crime. But obviously there's more and less observant people in any religion. Yeah, I don't know. I keep coming back to the mutilation thing, and there's damaged testicles, but it doesn't say anything about the penis, at least not here, in terms of like, a defect. And I gotta say, it's kind of bold to base your entire religion on cutting up babies' dicks at 8 days, and then anybody who, they slip at the bris is like disqualified from sacred service. That seems risky, doubly risky.
Are we moving on to 22?
Wait, I still have commentary.
Say it.
Verse 7. Women defiled by prostitution. The Hebrew it's Isha Zona Vechalala. While some, like Rabbi Akiva in the Talmud Yevamot 61b, Ibn Ezra, Milgrom, and Galil, interpret Zona plainly, a prostitute, Mishnah Yevamot 6.5 interprets Zona as either a female convert, a freed maidservant, or a woman who had sex with a man she was prohibited from marrying. The additional halala, translated in KJV as or profane, and in the NIV and JPS defiled, has been seen as either a woman who was the product of forbidden marriage, as seen in Kiddushin 77a and Galil, used by a man, according to Snaith, cultic prostitute, according to Moshe Tzipor, or as a case of hen deities, according to Levine. Milgrom renders halala as one who was raped, based on the root chet lamed lamed, which means both to desecrate and to pierce, and that the prohibited women are listed in descending order of their defect. Thus, halala must be less offensive than zona and more offensive than gerusha, divorcee. Therefore, if she was willing, she's a zona, but if forced, she is a halala. He further writes, in the ancient Near East, rape was considered a stigma. In the laws of Namu and Sumer, deflowering is described in the context of rape. In Israel, however, there is no stigma attached to a raped single girl, as in Deuteronomy 22, verses 28 to 29, if she is the daughter of a layman. But a stigma may very well exist if she is the daughter of a priest. Consider the case of a husband who finds that his bride is not a virgin. For her deception, she is put to death. However, a priest's daughter who is neither married nor betrothed, but just promiscuous, is burned by fire in verse 9. Finally, in view of the high degree of purity demanded of priest's bride in Second Temple times, it is altogether plausible that in the biblical period, rape disqualified a woman from marrying a priest.
On Milgram's idea, so Alter notes that his interpretation rests on rather flimsy philological evidence. Note that in verse 9, these same two roots are put together, this time as a verb and an infinitive. So I'm not even going to attempt to pronounce it because I know Tomer's going to get very mad. So degrade her.
Let me pronounce it then.
So he translated as degrade herself in whoring, strongly suggesting that they are a fixed collocation rather than designating two different possibilities.
So, based on your interpretation, this can be anything from burn the priest's daughter who became a shrine prostitute to other gods, to burn the priest's daughter who is a rape victim.
Somewhere
Goody.
in there.
I'm curious about male prostitutes.
That'll
we
be
do-
later on.
Be later, yeah.
In Deuteronomy, I believe.
Yeah.
I need to step.
There's a lot of
Keddashim,
male
I think.
prostitutes in the comments tonight.
They're called dogs.
Yeah. I skipped to verse 18 because I didn't really have a lot to say about the 9 to 17.
I see.
8 to 17, sorry. So and I went straight for the disfigurations. So in verse 18, we first have not first, but I took some of the more interesting descriptions that are described here. So about disfigured, the Hebrew it's charum. KJV renders he that hath a flat nose. This rendition is found in the Sifra. His nose is either flattened, blocked, petite, or elongated. Abba Yossi says, one who is able to paint both eyes with one stroke. The Septuagint and Targum Pseudo-Jonathan reads mutilated nose. Ibn Ezra and Levine render short-limbed, and the adjacent sarua, translated to deformed in NIV, is as long-limbed. Levine notes that the Akkadian verb aramu or haramu means to cover or stretch over, as by a membrane or of flesh, and it is used in medical texts to describe birth defects. He therefore writes that harum may designate one whose skin was stretched over unnaturally short limb.
So, like a cleft palate? Or...
Yes, one who JPS translates has a limb too short or too long to describe both the harum and sarwa. Verse 20. Verse 20 has an eye defect. In Hebrew, it's tevalul be'eino. Talmud Ba'achot 38a describes the tevalul as, quote, a white thread that bisects the iris and enters the black pupil, end quote. According to Levine, the term is derived from the root bet lamed lamed, to mix, and in Akkadian, the cognate balalu means to be spotted. He notes that it is used in omens with reference to the color of animals and humans. The festering source, in Hebrew it's garav. The KJV renders scurvy and JPS boil scar. According to the Sifa, the garav is either a potsherd or a dry boil. Milgrom notes that the Akkadian garabu means scab or scale disease and refers to a general category and not to a specific kind of skin ailment.
So just like leprosy previously.
No, leprosy is considered like
No, I mean like it's a term that covers a multitude of skin conditions.
yes, yes,
Not
it's different from-
specified. Yeah.
Yes, but it is different from leprosy. The running source in Hebrew it's yalefet. KJV renders scabbed, JPS scurvy, like the KJV before, and the Septuagint lichen-like growth. And Rashi, based on the Talmud Barachot 41a, writes that this is the Egyptian lichen, and it's called yalefet because it continues to cling, melapefet, to the body until the day of death, and it is moist from the outside and dry from the inside. Milgrom notes that the Akkadian liptu, which means disease and dissolved spot, is similar, and that it may be a specific kind of garav. And finally, about the damaged testicles. In Hebrew, it's meruach ashach, and KJV renders hath his stones broken, which I like. Milgrom comments, the hapex ashech means testicle in cognate languages, Akkadian ishku and Ugaritic ushk. The rabbis differ on the meaning of the hapex maroach. According to the Mishnah Berachot 7.5, Rabbi Ishmael maintains that it means nimrechu, crushed, from the root memreschet, whereas Rabbi Akiva holds that it means has wind, is swollen, enlarged, from the root reshvavchet. In either case, it implies that at least one testicle is impaired, compared, for example, the Septuagint and Peshitta. Another rabbinic opinion explains that the impairment is the lack of sperm cells in Talmud Barachot 52. This defect proves that the common denominator of the list is not an aesthetic or a visual criterion. Rather, it can be shown that this defect was arbitrarily chosen to match its equivalent number in the animal list in 2224. Alternatively, one can argue that it reflects the priests' aversion to their castrated counterparts in the pagan world.
Maybe I should have skipped today.
Yeah. Well, no. It's Hey, if I have to reason about priests' daughters being burned, you get to read about guys having their testicles crushed.
No. See,
Equality!
they shouldn't have their testicles crushed because if they
Yo.
did, they can't enter the temple.
No, they actually apparently they can still eat the sacred offerings. They just can't offer the sacred offerings
Right.
and go into the inner sanctum. So
Gets their nuts crushed. Is like a fad or something in this time period?
honestly,
just
might be a bit
of context
eunuchs
here.
are a thing.
Yeah.
Eunuchs
Yeah,
were
it
a
might
That's
have
a
thing.
been.
snip. This is a
No,
There's a,
well,
you know,
This was when they
depending on
invented
who
the
did it.
nutcracker.
yeah.
They wrote
You
a
might
play
have
about it and
Would
everything.
have a heyday with this one, I'll tell you that.
You might have also stood behind a bull at the wrong moment.
Yeah.
That's fair. I knew a friend who ended up with injuries after a horse kicked him in just the right spot.
An old friend of mine
Ah.
almost got his crushed. He got lucky and went to his leg when he was bull riding because he
So, yeah,
liked that
there-
for some reason. Yeah.
Now, would damage from accidents count as a defect, or does it have to be like a birth defect?
I mean, it
Oh,
says broken leg or a broken arm, so I assume that it is.
Yep.
Yeah, it would count.
Okay.
Definitely.
Yep.
Then I
it's-
assume it would only count for the length of the injury. Like,
Well, the thing is, in the ancient world, it's not like they had like
Injuries were
amazing medicine.
permanent.
Yeah, it's not like they had amazing medicine to.
no,
to
but
do much.
Egypt actually had some decent stuff. For its time.
Their
For its
ways of
time.
curing things. Their ways of curing things was to tell people to go out of the village until you get better.
No,
Well, I
that's
mean,
that's
they-
in here. I'm talking about Egypt.
They did have medicine.
Didn't they at least have
Yeah,
some setting of
medical
bones? I mean, I'm not saying they were performing heart surgery, but you know,
Right. Yeah. It was better than
Egyptian
nothing.
medicine's actually pretty good, actually, for the time period. If you
For
look
the
at it
time, yeah.
closely.
Yeah.
I'd
But,
still
like,
rather
this
go to
is,
John
uh,
Hopkins.
Yeah, but like at this time in this place, yeah, no, there wouldn't have been great medicine. So if you did have a broken arm or a broken leg or a busted nut, you would not be able to sacrifice.
Tough shit.
Oh, some days I'm really glad I don't have nuts.
Some days I envy you. Just
Okay, I will go to chapter 22. I see Aaron's gone.
I did have one question, Thomas. You mentioned earlier Meron.
Yeah.
What was that related to?
The
You
mourning
said
rites.
something about cutting hair for
cutting
the
the
dead.
hair. Yes.
So if
Is
you
that the
have
reason
busted
why-
nuts, then you can't go into the tabernacle, and if you bust a nut, then you have the death sentence.
If you bust a nut in the wrong place.
Or it could just be her who gets the death sentence. You know, you could just walk away and not know anything about it. She was whoring. Who knows who she was whoring to? It's all unknown. Burn the witch. It honestly, it kind of reminds me of something. I wish Lalandra was here. She'd back me up in this. In Christianity growing up, it was always a thing where pastors' kids were held to a higher standard in the congregation. They were harassed more by the old biddies and the nosy aunts and uncles. And if their parents did not like hold a firm line of, are you harassing the other parents of little boys this age who are acting in exactly the same way? No. Okay. Then they were like held to a higher standard. And although this didn't happen in every case, I personally can think of a couple of exceptions. There was many a pastor's kid who went pretty freaking wild.
wonder why.
Yeah, the loophole song kind of a thing. They'd go all. It was like the Catholic schoolgirl, just goes all the way.
The man who could ever reach me was the son of a preacher man. I mean, you know what I mean? What I'm talking there, huh? Yeah, come on, we understand.
Now, Minute Rice offers $6.66 and says every time the Bible has anything to say about women, it's gross and disgusting. How is this the basis of the world's largest religions?
Turn that
I
around.
know, right?
That's probably the reason why.
You know, the patriarchy is such a disgusting and horrible detriment to our society and culture. Eh?
And then Meslud, I had no idea how to say that, offers €5 and says, I mean this in the best way possible. I always tune in when I want to go to bed since the Quran days. It's disturbingly calming. Keep it coming. Thanks. I could get that.
It's mostly Tomer's dulcet tones.
Dulcet.
I can see Tomera's dulcet tones. I cannot see falling asleep to me talking about crushed testicles. And I don't even have testicles to crush.
Or wanting to stab some men.
And some people might be.
Hey, I
Well,
don't kink
the
shame.
men who wrote that, yeah, probably. It's not just the, but.
Yeah.
Okay. So moving on to Leviticus 22. The Lord said to Moses, tell Aaron and his sons to treat with respect the sacred offerings the Israelites consecrate to me, so they will not profane my holy name. I'm Rick James, bitch. I'm sorry.
I was waiting for that.
I am the Lord.
I don't see that verse.
Say to them for the generations to come, if any of your descendants is ceremonially unclean and yet comes near the sacred offerings that the Israelites consecrate to the Lord, that person must be cut off from my presence. I'm Rick James. If a descendant of Aaron
I'm writing that
has
in
a
my book.
defiling skin disease,
Pickle Rick.
Oh no! Please don't.
or a bodily discharge, he may not eat the sacred offerings until he is cleansed. He will also be unclean if he touches something defiled by a corpse or by anyone who has an emission of semen, or if he touches any crawling thing that makes him unclean, or any person who makes him unclean, whatever the uncleanliness may be. The one who touches any such thing will be unclean till evening, because that's how diseases work. They're afraid of the dark.
You should read this like ASMR.
No.
He must not eat any of the sacred offerings unless he has bathed himself with water. When the sun goes down, he will be clean, and after that he may eat the sacred offerings, for they are his food. He must not eat anything found dead or torn by wild animals, and so become unclean through it. I'm Rick James. The priests are to perform my service in such a way that they do not become guilty and die for treating it with contempt. I am Rick James, bitch, who makes them holy. No one outside a priest's family may eat the sacred offering, nor may the guest of a priest or his hired worker eat it. But if a priest buys a slave with money, or slaves are born in his household, they may eat his food. If a priest's daughter marries anyone other than a priest, she may not eat any of the sacred contributions. But if a priest's daughter becomes a widow or is divorced, yet has no children, and she returns to live in her father's household as in her youth, she may eat her father's food. No unauthorized person, however, may eat it. Anyone who eats a sacred offering by mistake must make restitution to the priest for the offering and have a fifth of the value to it. The priests must not desecrate the sacred offerings the Israelites present to the Lord by allowing them to eat sacred offerings and so bring upon them the guilt of requiring payment. I am Rick James, who makes them holy. Are we going to continue?
Yeah. Continue. You can
Okay.
finish this.
The Lord said to Moses, speak to Aaron and his sons and to all the Israelites and say to them, if any of you, whether an Israelite or a foreigner residing in Israel, presents a gift for a burnt offering to the Lord, either to fulfill a vow or as a free will offering, you must present a male without defect from the cattle, sheep, or goats in order that it may be accepted on your behalf. Do not bring anything with a defect, because it will not be accepted on your behalf. When anyone brings from their herd or flock a fellowship offering to the Lord to fulfill a special vow, as in a free will offering, it must be without defect or blemish to be accountable. Do not offer to the Lord the blind or injured or maimed or anything with warts or festering or running sores. Do not place any of these on the altar as a food offering presented to the Lord. You may, however, present as a free will offering an ox or a sheep that is deformed or stunted, but it will not be accepted in fulfillment of a vow. You must not offer the Lord an animal whose testicles are bruised, crushed, torn, or cut, because I've got this weird fixation with testes. You must not do this on your own in your own land. You must not accept animals from the hand of a foreigner and offer them as food to your God. They will not be accepted on your behalf because they are deformed and have defects.
God wants him some prairie oysters.
The Lord said to Moses, when a calf, a lamb, or a goat is born, it is to remain with its mother for 7 days. From the 8th day on, it will be acceptable as a food offering presented to the Lord. Do not slaughter a cow or a sheep and its young on the same day, because that's icky. When you sacrifice a thank you offering to the Lord, sacrifice it in such a way that it will be accepted on your behalf. It must be eaten that same day. Leave none of it till morning. I'm Rick James, bitch. Keep my commands and follow them. I'm Rick James. Do not profane my holy name, for I must be acknowledged as holy by the Israelites. I'm Rick James, bitch, who made you holy and who brought you out of Egypt to be your God. I am Rick James.
In
You
case
just
anyone
made it
forgot.
1,000 times better. So if the Holy Spirit is that Rich James ghost?
Who is Rich James?
Rick James.
No,
Rick
Rick
James.
James, bitch.
Look it up. If you don't
It's a
know.
meme.
It's
It's an
a meme.
American meme. Yeah.
a
Oh,
goodie.
okay.
It's a goodie.
I mean, at
Americans are
some
weird.
point, I am the Lord does get tiring if you don't have actual Samuel L. Jackson to read it for you. So
Yep.
My commentary isn't that. It's quite short. It's a page and a half because I didn't really have a lot to say about this chapter. So I'll start with verse 7. When the sun goes down, Galil comments, there is no contradiction between verse 6 and verse 7. The wording is a bit cumbersome, but the intention of the scripture is clear. The priest cannot be purified and eat, except in the evening. When he is impure, he washes his flesh in water, and only after sunset he is considered pure and is allowed to eat from the sacred donations. End quote. Milgrom adds that this clause is needed for explanatory and rhetorical purposes, both to define evening as sunset and to emphasize that eating in the evening is a special concession granted to the priests, as stated in the rest of the verse.
So if the priests live off the offerings and they're not allowed to feed their guests the offerings, what do they feed their guests?
You don't feed the guests. What you feed is yourselves as priests, and the I mean,
And your slaves.
I suppose if you really want to keep them alive, and there's there is so the sections that we've covered so far today are primarily dealing with the holiness of the sanctuary itself. These are things that will either first profane the sanctuary or profane the offerings to the sanctuary. And of course, a lot of those similar rules will apply. So if you are a maimed person, you cannot give offerings. And if you are a maimed animal, you cannot be an offering. Lucky them.
Yay.
The
I
second.
wonder if natural selection caused all animals to be born with defects.
Eventually, it would.
And then the
In that
priests were
part
like,
of the world.
God has cursed us.
Yeah, a lot of scholars have thought that these sections, because they seem so simplistic, are like what's the word I can put on them? Are like basically the author of the Holiness Code was taking from known traditions and putting them together in this, but it seems like they do have the same general idea. You get a lot of problems if they were from other traditions. However, they did have source material though. So like for example, if we go to what is it, 22? Is it 22:27? Yeah, 22:27. I know we're not. Actually, you know what? Yeah, I'll wait until Tomer gets there, and then we'll.
For clarity,
traditions for it.
For clarity, it seems like they are more concerned with twitting and refusing to in any way do anything like anyone around them, just twitting the traditions of their neighbors, than they are with any actual sustainable, healthy practices of farming, agriculture, horticulture, or husbandry, or
not necessarily, because some of these things they did keep in their tradition. So if you compare like was it Ezekiel Ezekiel 44, it seems to contain some semblance of like, oh, here are priestly duties, because he starts talking about like the Levite priests, for example, and what they should do, what's expected of them. So it's clear that there was some semblance of a Levitical tradition. But then this was a kind of like an expansion of it. But then I'll cover that a bit more once we get to
this DLC sucks.
Yeah.
Yeah, I want a refund.
Not good expansion pack.
Let's play Skyrim instead.
You know what? We should rather stream that. It'd be more fun.
Skyrim belongs.
Let's talk about the 9. Now we'll talk about some real gods, Talos, nerd stuff. I love it.
Verse 8. So I have Savage Ibn Ezra here. Those whose brains are empty explain the verse in Ezekiel, which reads, the priest shall not eat of anything, whether bird or animal, that died or was
1,000 years ago, right?
Yeah, 12th century.
Blessed be.
Ezekiel 44:31, as meaning that the priests shall not eat anything brought down or torn by animals or fowl. However, this is nonsense, for the Torah states that all that dies or is torn, the priest shall not eat. The meaning of verse 8 is, if he eats that which dies or is torn, he shall not minister.
I
Verse
mean, I thought it was pretty clear earlier that eating flesh torn by wild animals or an animal found dead from a fall or something would make you unclean and was not permitted. So, yeah, don't break the law and then immediately go and be the functional priest at someone's offering. Yeah, that.
Verse 10, the guest of a priest or his hired worker. In Hebrew, it's toshav, kohen, vesachir. The exact meaning of these terms has been debated. Chazal, in the Sifra in Talmud Kiddushin 4a, identified the toshav as a lifelong slave and a sachir as a slave who leaves after 6 years. The Septuagint, followed by the NIV and KJV, renders toshav as resident alien of a priest and the sachir as a hireling. Milgrom, citing Ezra Tzion Melamed, writes that the two terms are handaides, and therefore renders the phrase a priest's resident hireling. Verse 12, Levine comments, a priest's daughter derives the privilege of partaking of the priest's food from her father, who is responsible for her care as long as she resides in his domicile. If she marries a member of the priesthood, her entitlement then derives from her husband. But if she marries outside the priesthood, there is no basis for her enjoying this privilege.
Yes, of course. Property rights.
We did skip over verse 11 says a person who is the priest's property by purchase may eat of them. Some understood this to include the wives of the priests, since a marriage can include a transaction,
a bride price. Yeah.
So this is where you learn out that the wives are also allowed to eat.
I know that in later traditions that has been interpreted far differently, right? Like it's not like a buying kind of thing. Like it's not a direct purchase, although it does kind of.
Yeah, I think you transfer the money to the woman. So it depends on, I guess, the timing. When I guess the tradition changed over time.
Yeah, because some people are like, well, it's like a show of gratitude or something like that. But I'm like, it definitely like seems like you're just buying a person.
I mean, it's look, anyone who spent time in church is well aware of the amount of excuses and, well, it really means, and the retconning and retroactive justification for something that when it began was pretty fucking horrific. Like this is pretty standard in religion, in all religions, is the, oh, no, it has a deeper meaning, blah, 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 blah. And, traditions can perhaps grow deeper and more subtle meanings over time. That would probably be an improvement. I do have to wonder if they're talking about, a discharge. How are they checking for this? Is this like the anti-trans bathroom bills where they're checking your genitals before you go in? Does a priest have that duty of checking everybody's bits?
Turns out, drop your pants before you enter is traditional.
Hey, this man has no nuts. He must not enter here.
Well, I think we've read in, I don't know if it's a 15 or 14 or 15, that the person has to go to the priest and to be checked. So, yeah.
Wait.
Verse. Oh.
Just a second. Yeah. So we wanted to finish with the marriage thing with the money. To this day, like Jewish people for weddings, they have 2 rings. The men don't wear rings. They have the woman has 2 rings. One is part of the actual wedding ceremony, and it's normally just a plain band. And then the other is given as like an engagement ring, and that's the one with the diamond. But obviously, the diamond ring is a very recent tradition that was invented by De Beers Company. But
we have the same tradition here, except for men also wear rings too.
Yeah. So the engagement ring was just like, oh, we want diamond rings, but you're not allowed to have embellished rings for the actual wedding. So they have an engagement ring, which is fancy, and then the wedding ring, which is just a band.
Yep.
My best
which is
attempt
the one
at
that
this
actually...
name, Tomaz Sushekli, offers $1.99 and says, how did they avoid animal abscesses back then?
Sharp needles.
My final comment is in
Yeah.
verse 23. Bamberger comments, this verse permits a slightly deformed animal to be used as a freewill offering, probably, but not certainly, to be offered as a sacrifice. But it is the only exception to the otherwise invariable rule that sacrifices must be unblemished. The explanation given by the rabbis in the Sifra is therefore not implausible, that this free will offering is not to be put on the altar, but it is to be sold in the proceeds contributed to the sanctuary. End quote. Bechol Show, however, writes that the deformed or stunted, in Hebrew sarua vekalut, is to be read extended or contracted limb, as JPS renders it, and therefore is acceptable for a freewill offering. Abravanel, followed by Milgrom and Levine, writes that the freewill offering is not obligated by any prior commitment, as was the votive offering in Hebrew neder, and therefore the former had less stringent requirements than the latter.
So don't look at the offering in the mouth.
Yeah, well, there's special allowances for beef.
Where's the beef?
Yeah,
So
that's
so,
it
Long
for my
as
comment.
medium rare.
so in
All right, so
verse 20,
Wait, Lawrence.
Yeah. So sorry, did Arn? You want to say something?
no, Lawrence, go ahead.
Okay, so yeah, so in verse 27, yeah, when a bull or goat is born, it shall be 7 days under its mother, and from the 8th day onward, it is acceptable as a fire offering to the Lord. So this section, it actually has kind of an interesting history here. So
So do they kill the calf, or do they slit its throat and then burn it, or do they just tie it to a stake and set it on fire?
I think this is one where they have
It
to
has to be slaughtered
kill it
first.
first. Yeah.
Yeah,
they have to
no,
kill it
sorry.
first.
Only the priest's daughter gets burned alive. Sorry. Cows get slaughtered.
So
Yeah.
this is from a law book for the diaspora from John Van Setters. So given that Ezekiel insists on the existence of a law regarding the first birth and the close association of Ezekiel with the Holiness Code, it is perhaps surprising that there is no such law in the firstborn in the Holiness Code, only a prohibition against giving against the giving of offspring to Molech, which is considered a foreign practice. Nevertheless, the Holiness Code in Leviticus 22:27 does contain a parallel to the law as it stands in Exodus 22, and it remains to investigate the relationship between the two. Leviticus 22:7 states, when an ox or lamb or kid is born. So he uses a different variation of that. So yeah, when a bull or a goat is born is what it says, at least in the Masoretic, according to Alter. And then he translates it as an ox or lamb or kid is born. So this piece of instruction reads not as if it were a separate self-contained law, but as a qualification on some previous law. The most obvious one with which to combine it is Deuteronomy 15:19, the law of the firstlings. Every firstling that is born among your cattle and your sheep, the male, you are to consecrate to Yahweh your God. You are not to work the firstborn of your oxen, and you are not to shear the firstborn of your sheep. Deuteronomy deals with the specific requirement regarding firstlings, that they cannot be worked or sheared, but does not say how soon after birth it is to be consecrated and how old it may be as an offering at the time of the annual sacrifice. The general regulation in Leviticus 22:27 answers this question. So he does this comparison between Exodus 22:29 and Deuteronomy 15:19, where Leviticus seems to be a combination of the two. If you go with the interpretation that it's an ox or lamb or kid, so he's kind of arguing that it is just a combination. Then he goes on to say that since the whole law in Exodus 22 seems to presuppose both Deuteronomy and the Holiness Code of Leviticus 22, and also borrows the wording of Exodus 13 and 34, the requirement about giving the firstborn sons to Yahweh is a statement of principle that presupposes the qualifications of the other laws in J. There is a very similar use of the general statement of principle in Nehemiah 10:37, in which the people commit themselves to bring in annually to the house of Yahweh, quote, the firstborn of our sons and our animals, as it is written in the law, and the firstlings of our herds and flocks. Judging from the language, this is almost certainly a conflation of the law in Exodus and Deuteronomy. Yet it would be entirely erroneous to deduce from this statement that child sacrifice was being. He goes into child sacrifice a little bit. So what has clearly changed from the early festival origins of the firstling laws and the sacrifice or dedication of the first birth of humans and animals is the transformation of these into the means of support for the temple.
TLDL.
Yeah, fair enough.
TLDR, you can't touch babies or animals or people for 8 days, and then you can.
Well, the TLDR would be closer to this section takes from those traditions and combines them.
Yeah. No,
Okay.
it does, and I mean that's why I think there's so much debate about things like human sacrifice in the Bible, whether or not it's really hard to tell when you have sets of combined traditions that have been overlaid with explanations for so many centuries.
Well, we know it is illegal to sacrifice children to Molech. That it's clear about. To the Jewish God, maybe.
Well, unless the thing is, depending on the time period, right? But unless unless Molech is meant to be a type of sacrifice rather than a god, and that's something else I want to do a video on. There is
like a thing about like passing a child through the fire.
Right, you get that with the Valley of Ben Hinnom, and that's its own. That has its own issues. So,
Sonic Youth 1979 says, I get a lot of respect for this panel, or I got a lot of respect for this panel, just on the fact that they deal with the most dry, tedious, and boring writings ever.
Thank you.
Don't worry. Once we get to judges, it'll get good again.
Okay, I apologize. I'm going to be very drunk for at least several portions of Judges, and I will not even apologize. It is totally justified, but I will be drunk.
Okay, so are we moving to 23?
Just a second.
I think Isaac wanted to say something.
In verse 24, it mentions you should not offer up anything that has its testes bruised, crushed, torn, cut. And then it says, you shall have no such practices in your own land, implying you should not castrate. And it is understood, like Jewish tradition, Jewish law, like it's forbidden to castrate anyone, any
including
human,
animals?
any animal. This is about animals, and they extend it to people as well. Like in general, like castration is forbidden, and this actually complicates, can be complicated because of like, people sometimes need to have surgery for what's the name, cancer,
testicular cancer,
testicular cancer, stuff like that, and it can be problematic. Like, can you have men go through surgery or whatever that might cause you to become whatever the word is, you can't have children or whatever.
A eunuch
or
chaste, not chaste.
Yeah, whatever the word is, not celibate. That's the wrong word. But there's a whole thing about that, and there's even people who are like, well, any sort of hormone therapy or whatever that could cause you to become sterile. That's the word. Would also be forbidden according to this commandment.
So no eunuchs in the temple.
Absolutely
no
not.
eunuchs in the temple, and apparently no birth control pills for me. Because hormones and not having kids.
Yeah. I think it's mostly this. The law is for males, and for females, it's probably not like a.
Well, that's really.
It's not forbidden according to this anyway. It might be like a, if you
in
were
good news.
Yeah.
I'm divorced, so I can't marry a priest. Yay!
I do want to say there is a big difference between the priests mentioned here and Christian priests. Like they have very different
I know.
Different rules.
They don't sacrifice on the altar.
Yeah,
I hope not.
Jewish priests are like is a hereditary class, and Christian priests should not be in any class of rooms at all. But separately,
they still wear dresses. And
all right, are we moving to 23 then?
Yeah, I think I should read this because it's 40. How long is it? 44 verses, and
okay.
It's not.
I was going to have Isaac read it. Yeah. I'll do it. The
don't
Lord
mind
said to Moses,
Oh.
Speak to the Israelites and say to them, these are my appointed festivals, and the appointed festivals of the Lord, which you are to proclaim as sacred assemblies. There are 6 days when you may work, but the 7th is a day of Sabbath rest, a day of sacred assembly. You are not to do any work wherever you live. It is the Sabbath of the Lord. These are the Lord's appointed festivals, the sacred assemblies you are to proclaim at their appointed time. The Lord's Passover begins at twilight on the 14th day of the first month. The 14th day of that month, the Lord's festival of unleavened bread to begin. For 7 days you must eat bread made without yeast. On the first day, hold a sacred assembly and do no regular work. For 7 days, present food offering to the Lord. And on the 7th day, hold a sacred assembly and do no regular work. I like how they've added regular.
Orange,
your
sound a
audio
bit
is a little
muffled.
bit-
Yeah.
Yeah,
audio is a bit-
check your source for your mic. It might have switched to something else halfway through that.
Why would it switch in the middle of the show? But okay,
don't
I'll check
know.
that.
Is
Weird.
there some
I-
kind of passive noise filter that might be eating you?
Do you
Should I
want me
fine
continue
now.
and try and go fast?
You
to?
sound
Yes,
sound
go
okay
ahead.
right
now.
now.
Oh, sorry.
Put on your God voice, Isaac. Show this book the reverence it deserves.
Adonai spoke to Moses, saying, Speak to the Israelite people and say to them, When you enter the land that I am giving to you, and you reap its harvest, you shall bring the first sheaf of your harvest to the priest. He shall elevate the sheaf before the Lord for acceptance in your behalf. The priest shall elevate it on the day after the Sabbath. On the day that you elevate the sheaf, you shall offer a burnt offering to the Lord, a lamb of the first year without blemish. The meal offering with it shall be 2/10 of a measure of choice flour with oil mixed in, an offering by fire of pleasing odor to the Lord. And the libation with it shall be of wine, 1/4 of a hin. Until that very day, until you have brought the offering of your God, you shall eat no bread, or parched grain, or fresh ears. It is a law for all time, throughout the ages, in all your settlements. And from the day on which you bring the sheaf of elevation offering, the day after the Sabbath, you shall count off 7 weeks. They must be complete. You must count until the day after the 7th week, 50 days. Then you shall bring an offering of new grain to the Lord. You shall bring from your settlements 2 loaves of bread as an elevation offering. Each shall be made of 2/10 of a measure of choice flour, baked after leavening, as first fruits to the Lord. With the bread you shall present as burnt offering to the Lord 7 yearling lambs without blemish, 1 bull of the herd, and 2 rams, with their meal offerings and libations, an offering by fire of pleasing odor to the Lord. You shall also offer 1 he-goat as a sin offering, and 2 yearling lambs as a sacrifice of well-being. The priest
I
shall
gotta say,
elevate these.
this is as exciting as reading tax law.
Well, it's kind of a grocery list when you think about it.
Oh yeah,
How is my sound now? Is it
Good.
any better?
Yeah.
Really?
yeah, sounds good.
I do notice on the feast, the first fruits, that nobody is allowed to have any of the grain until God got his. He eats first. He is a special snowflake. You can only eat last year's grain if you have any until he has his. So that's always fun.
In the comments, Bart Vanderlinden offers 5.99 euro and says, I have a growing suspicion my priest is cherry picking verses. Yes, I suspect you may be correct. And then Sparrow says, I don't know if this was asked already, but was using the rhythm method prohibited?
Rhythm method? What is this?
It's a different language, so it does flow a lot better. This part, this whole chapter
Wait.
is very flowy. Actually,
Are you talking about
part of
like chanting
We're
like like you speaking a rhythm?
No,
Kind of
it's
can
No,
trance.
no. This
Birth
was a
control.
popular Catholic method of birth control
oh,
where because
Oh.
Catholics couldn't do any other birth control. It was a matter of timing with the menstrual cycle.
Oh
and
my
and
goodness!
some of them managed to have
Okay,
as few
I'm on
as
board
12 children using the rhythm method. So it
I mean, like my
totally-
dad's family.
yeah.
my parents
yeah,
only
it's-
have 7
We
kids.
have
So they don't use any birth
Only
control.
yeah, it's my dad's family, 7 kids. We would have had 8, but when didn't make it.
And
Yeah, we
my
used to
brother
have kids, but we
has-
sprayed for them, and so we don't have it.
If only-
Call the exterminator.
Kid be
my
gone.
brother.
So there's like a kid version of Raid, or
Yeah, that's
My
called Child
brother
Protective
had-
Services.
I'm
My
sorry,
brother-
Isaac. I interrupted your reading of tax law.
Yes.
I would say my brother's like had his 8th kid in 9 years, so sometimes it works,
That's-
sometimes it doesn't.
It's pretty
No wonder
impressive.
you're
Yeah,
gay.
it
All
sounds
right, let's
like
continue.
it a lot doesn't.
Yeah. Verse 20. Let's continue. The priest shall elevate these 2 lambs, together with the bread of first fruits, as an elevation offering before the Lord. They shall be holy to the Lord for the priest. On that same day you shall hold a celebration. It shall be a sacred occasion for you. You shall not work at your occupations. This is a law for all time in all your settlements throughout the ages. And when you reap the harvest of your land, you shall not reap all the way to the edge of your field, or gather the gleanings of your harvest. You shall leave them for the poor and the stranger. I am the Lord your God. The Lord spoke to Moses.
This practice, then, this is so important that it's not only in the shut up, dog.
Yeah,
It's not only in the 10 Commandments in Exodus 34, that these are the 10 Commandments according to the Bible, but we get the Festival of Weeks again here too, and it's been repeated a couple of other times, as I
It
remember.
is important for Jews.
Yeah, well, yeah, but it's important for the people who follow the Bible, isn't it? So that would mean that Jesus was Jewish. Jesus said that you had to follow every jot and tittle of all those old Mosaic laws. So that means that Christianity follows the Festival of Weeks, right?
Matthew's Jesus.
if they
That was the
converted.
Jewish friendly Jesus who was supposed to convince the Jews to convert because he was filled with totes for real prophecy guys.
Well, the thing about Jesus, right, is that he would have been, he would have had a totally different interpretation than the, at the time would have been the Pharisees, right?
2 Jews, 3 opinions.
Right. So,
It's-
the idea for Jesus may have been totally different.
Hmm. Could be,
only
but
halfway.
yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Okay,
Please continue.
almost finished.
Yeah.
The Lord spoke to Moses, saying, "Speak to the Israelite people in the 7th month, on the 1st day of the month. You shall observe complete rest, a sacred occasion, commemorate with loud blasts." This is Rosh Hashanah, by the way. You shall not work at your occupations, and you shall bring an offering by fire to the Lord. The Lord spoke to Moses, saying, "Mark the 10th day of the 7th month as a day of atonement. It shall be a sacred occasion for you. You shall practice self-denial, and you shall bring an offering by fire to the Lord. You shall do no work throughout that day, for it is a day of atonement on which expiation is made on your behalf before your God, the Lord. Indeed, any person who does not practice self-denial throughout that day shall be cut off from kin. And whoever does any work throughout that day, I will cause that person to perish from among the people. Do not work whatever. It is a law for all time throughout the ages in all your settlements. It shall be a Sabbath of complete rest for you, and you shall practice self-denial. On the 9th day of the month, at evening, from evening to evening, you shall observe this, your Sabbath." And the Lord
This is
spoke to
fasting,
Moses.
right?
Yeah,
This
this
is
is
Yom
Yom
Kippur.
Kippur.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so that's fasting. I just want to be clear.
Yes,
The
self-denial is
self-denial
fasting. Yes, yes.
is fasting.
Fasting, not wearing leather shoes, and not showering, maybe something like that.
Ugh.
Oh,
The
For
I
24 hours,
Orthodox, at least.
pretty much.
The Orthodox, at least.
Yeah. The Lord spoke
The
to Moses,
ritual
saying,
practice of not grooming.
Yeah, it's just for one 24
So
hours.
you're a dirty, smelly old man because it's your religious practice that requires it. Okay.
But at least no one's doing any work. They're all sitting in synagogue wailing all day. The Lord spoke to Moses, saying, "Say to the Israelite people, on the 15th day of the 7th month, there shall be a feast of booths, also Sukkot,
Sukkot.
to the Lord, to last 7 days. The first day shall be a sacred occasion. You shall not work at your occupations. 7 days you shall bring offerings by fire to the Lord. On the 8th day you shall observe a sacred occasion and bring an offering by fire to the Lord. It is a solemn gathering at Seret, because that day is also called Shmini Atzeret,
Shmini
it's the
Atzeret, yeah.
8th.
Mhm.
You shall not work at your occupations. Those are the set times of the Lord that you shall celebrate as sacred occasions, bringing offerings by fire to the Lord, burnt offerings, meal offerings, sacrifices, and libations on each day, what is proper to it. Apart from
Okay,
the
so it
Sabbath
says
of...
it says not to work at your occupations, but what if you want to?
Well, you can't.
But what if you
Continue,
want to?
please, Isaac.
Apart,
Get struck
death to
down
all
by
of them.
hellfire, obviously.
To quote
How
wherever her name
dare
is.
you want to do things for people? How cannot work. No.
It's fine. God will just kill you and everyone you love because you worked when he told you not to, even though you wanted to, so it wasn't really work. But hey, shut up.
The land will vomit you out.
Yeah.
Yes.
Apart from the Sabbath of the Lord, and apart from your gifts, and from all your votive offerings, and from all your free will offerings that you give to the Lord. Okay.
Question.
Mark. Yeah.
If everyone has to fast, but there's also all these offerings being given, and you can't leave the offerings overnight, does that mean the priests are partying while everyone else starves?
Well, that is the thing. See, it's the common people that are bringing their food ultimately to the Lord, which means they're feeding the priests.
Yeah.
So the priests don't have to make a living. They just their job is to pretend that the magic imaginary voice tells them shit. It tells them to tell you what to do, and you have to believe them because they speak for the magic imaginary voice.
I mean,
and the magic imaginary voice says, "I like mutton."
Yeah,
it's a good question.
Exactly.
But I think on that day there is only a few sacrifices brought, and the high priest. I think we read it a few chapters ago. The high priest does it all by himself. So maybe the high priest eats.
Maybe
from
he
them?
just has like a small sacred nibble, like the.
Maybe, and a lot of it is burnt as well. So that is a good question. Okay, 39. Mark on the 15th day of the 7th month, when you have gathered in the yield of your land, you shall observe the festival of the Lord to last 7 days, a complete rest on the first day and a complete rest on the 8th day. On the first day you shall take the product of beautiful trees.
Hadar trees.
Hadar trees.
Yes.
This is normally translated as the citrus.
Yeah, I have a commentary on this.
Branches of palm trees, boughs of leafy trees. Normally, I think those are myrtle.
I have a commentary on this one as well.
Okay. And willow of the brook, and you shall rejoice before your God, the Lord, for 7 days. You shall observe it as a festival of the Lord for 7 days in the year. You shall observe it in the 7th month as a law for all time throughout the ages. You shall live in
for all time throughout the ages. Everybody who follows God is going to have to follow that. So the Christians follow this, then, right?
Well, it is a law for the people, for the Israelites.
So the people that Jesus represents later on, right?
Well, if you're not an Israelite, then no.
I guess it's based on philosophy.
And then where does it specify the separation there?
It's like the whole time it says, "Speak to the children of Israel, saying, you shall blah blah blah."
Yeah,
isn't that what Jesus says also? I mean, it said, "You don't go to the houses of the Gentiles; only go to the houses of Israel."
If it's Jesus, depends on if it's Jesus 1.0, what was it 0.1 or version or Jesus 2.0.
That is true. Depends on the Jesus.
Well, did you buy the DLC?
What, the Book of Mormon?
I
have three more verses.
I think you just got today's award.
3 more verses. You shall live in booths 7 days. All citizens in Israel shall live in booths, in order that future generations may know that I made the Israelite people live in booths when I brought them out of the land of Egypt. I am your God, the Lord. So Moses declared to the Israelites the set times of the Lord. Yeah, there's a lot of interesting shit in this one.
Yeah, but my commentary is only 3 pages, so I only selected the things that I found the most interesting. At least I tried.
Yeah.
So verses 2 to 3. Appointed festivals. The Hebrew it's moed. According to Levine, the word is derived from the root yud ayin dalid, to set or designate a time or place, and so moed means set time. He notes, however, the problem in using this term with reference to the Sabbath. Quote, elsewhere in the ritual legislation, it usually designates an annual occurrence. A moed occurs at the same time each year. Its annual date must be fixed, quote unquote. There is, however, no need to fix the time of the Sabbath, which is not, strictly speaking, a calendrical phenomenon, as Rashi has pointed out. Furthermore, biblical usage regularly differentiates between Shabbat, the Sabbath, and Moed, as in verses 37 to 38 of our chapter, which speak of the set times of the Lord as being apart from the Sabbaths of the Lord. Accordingly, the use of Moed for the Sabbath is most likely to be explained by the influence of the language of verse 4 upon that of verse 2.
Yeah, basically every scholar agrees with that. The thing about the Sabbath there is a later addition, and I mean for this entire chapter, it's clear that there has been some a decent bit of editing going on, and there has always been a debate around like what parts came first or like what parts are original, right? So like some scholars think that like the first fruits one was not originally part of it, but it kind of makes more sense to instead have this be originally a priestly tradition that was later edited uh, uh, by the like a holiness redactor. So the guy who would have
Yeah.
added in the the vast majority of the holiness code. That's generally how that's viewed.
Even
now.
the earliest scholarship agrees that the end of this chapter is all redactor. So
Yeah, and in verse 4, Milgrom proposes that this verse, with verse 1 and the beginning of verse 2, were the original heading of H's original pre-exilic calendar. Evidence for this is found in the lack of the phrase Yahweh spoke to Moses, saying, for the Paschal offering and the Feast of Unleavened Bread.
Yeah. So that would have been for an H redactor, right? But that would be different from P first, and the like especially was a verses. Yeah, so there are obviously a lot of similarities between this and a lot of the stories we get, but it's obviously written after the formation of traditions. Now that doesn't necessarily tell us that like they're using the story from Exodus, for example, because you can have the legal prescription for it, and then you can have a later ideological story about it. So like I think that the idea of not having like a law of the first fruits initially started is kind of weird. So Nihan notes here, it is true that in H first fruits is this is actually one of the like a crux for something later here. In H, first fruits is no longer presented as a pilgrimage festival, as is the case in the other calendars. Apparently, the feast is now celebrated potentially at home by the people. So the phrase "in all your settlements" is in both verses 21 and 14. So it kind of expands the meaning of where you can celebrate it.
And that very much supports the idea that you had, parallel but somewhat diverse traditions that were being retconned together, and a certain amount of justification taken from the current religion for something that may very well have originated with another god, goddess, tradition, or festival, and just again try to like patchwork. No, it's always been one thing, I swear. So
in their mind, it would have been more like, okay, well, let's make sense of all this.
Yeah, but they were also very much about we have to come as one people now, and just we, the tribes and so forth, and they wrote this whole history where they were all family once upon a time, and then the other tribes that were maybe no more distantly related could be the evil people that you must purge out of the land, etc., etc. So it's I just shades of love the mask.
Verse 10, about the sheaf. In Hebrew, it's omel.
I just wanted to say something about you said about verse 2 about like why is the day of the week? Why is the Sabbath like not? Why is it? Wouldn't it be considered different? And I've always wondered, like, how do we know what day of the week it is? Like,
I mean, you just
Well,
start.
My phone tells me.
The sun was created on Sunday, so if that's day 4, or whatever the hell it was.
Traditionally, how do we know that there isn't been like someone forgot what day of the week and then that was it? We've all forgotten, and we're all celebrating Sunday on the wrong day.
That's
because there's no like natural basis to it.
Yeah, somewhere along the line, it would have started as record keeping, and then they just said, okay, here's how we're going, and then in some cultures you could keep records. Maybe that's like a small thing, like a tally thing that they do in prison walls or some shit, or so that might have been one way that it started. Maybe they would have had like a daily sacrificial thing. Could be a few few reasons why that kind of got going, but eventually it I mean, for days of the week, has it? I don't know about like all cultures' calendrical systems, so I can't speak to this entirely. But like, you could feasibly have like, because usually like cultures have like around the same like 365 days for a year, and I'm not sure how diverse like weeks are in each
But
culture.
it varies, but the cyclical nature of it is very common. Whether you're talking about the ancient Mayan or Aztec calendars, where you have like sort of wheels within wheels, cycles within cycles, the entire Hindu cosmology and ideas of time is all about greater cycles and lesser cycles within greater cycles, and all of
Right.
that.
I mean, like
it's
a
pretty
year is
universal.
based on like the observation of the sun. The moon is based on the observation of the
Yeah.
moon originally.
And a week is
Um,
probably just a convenient division that, for shorter term, because frankly, it's a bit of a pain in the ass to take some things out over the length of
Seven
the whole
is a
year.
magical number. There
Well,
is
Yeah, it
there is
varied
one
from
thing
culture
which
to culture.
is there is one thing that kind of unifies a few different cultures, which is like the days of the week are named after the same planets. So Sunday named after the sun, Monday's named after the moon, Tuesday's named after Jupiter.
Yeah, I'm not sure about.
No, Wednesday is Jupiter.
No.
Sorry.
So I'm
Yeah,
not
I'm
whatever.
reading about Nordic gods, but I think we're diverging a bit, but I'm not gonna hold.
Yeah, I mean, like in French, for example, they've got like they've got the names of the planets, and in
Tomer, we were
Chinese,
asked to kind of
named
take a little
after
break
the-
hitting from the tax codes. This is our break from the tax code.
Well, if you want to take a break, chapter 24 is going to be very interesting. So,
oh, that's
maybe
good.
we'll wrap this up quickly. So,
Okay.
about verse 10, the sheaf. Hebrew, it's omer. The word could denote either a bundle of stalks bound together after reaping, as seen in Deuteronomy 24:19 and Ruth 2:7, or a measuring unit, which is a half of an ephah, as seen in Exodus 16, verses 17 to 22 and 36. While the Septuagint, Vulgate, and Philo in James 2:75 supported the former interpretation, Chazal in Mishnah Menachot 10:4, followed by Sa'ad Gaon, Rashi, and Bechor Shor, supported the latter. Modern commentators prefer the bundle of stalks rendition based on the context of this section. Verse 11, wave the sheaf before the Lord. According to Levine, the purpose of this rite was to show the offering to God, so that it might be accepted. Mishnah Menachot 5:6 describes the procedure. Quote, how does one perform this waving? He places the two loaves on top of the two lamps and places his two hands below the loaves and the lamps, extends the offering to each of the four directions and brings them back, then raises and lowers them. Quote. The day after the Sabbath, in Hebrew, Mimacharat HaShabbat. It is not clear which Sabbath is being referred here. Milgrom writes that this phrase gave rise to arguably the most long-lasting schism in the history of the Jewish people, and gives four interpretations for this Sabbath. One, the weekly Sabbath that falls during the week of the festival of unleavened bread, as suggested by the Samaritans and Karaites. Two, the weekly Sabbath that follows after the festival, as suggested by the Boethusians and the Qumran sect. The third is the day of rest from laborious work prescribed for this festival, either in the first day, as suggested by the Pharisees, Septuagint, Philo in Laws 2.162, and Josephus in Antiquities 3.250, and 4, or the seventh day, as Peshitta and Beta Israel suggest. He and Levine proposed that the phrase is a gloss, meant to ensure that the period of counting the 7 weeks would begin on the day for the after the Sabbath.
This would have meant that the Feast of Weeks, Shavuot in Hebrew, would have been celebrated on a different day, depending on which sect you were in. So, all Jews to nowadays follow the Pharisees and the Masoretic, and so they follow. It's the day after the first day of Passover, and they actually Jews actually count. They call it counting the Yomer. They count all of these days. Every day they will say like a blessing, and then they will say today is the 21st day of the Yomer, and then on the 50th day, it's Shavuot. It's a festival of weeks. And Samaritans and Karaites keep a different date, as noted.
Yes.
Um,
The other
I have
And when do
always
they
thought-
specify When do they specify that Christians have a different set of rules and a different Sabbath and all that?
Hebrews.
That's yeah, and there's a couple mentions in Acts about them celebrating on this Sunday because Jesus rose. Then yada yada.
Oh yeah, there's the whole thing about where I forget, wasn't in Acts the whole like, oh, you can now eat these foods?
Yeah, that's in Acts. That's the bit with Peter and the sheep coming down. But the part about celebrating on Sunday is sort of a throwaway when they're talking about the Christians in Antioch when they were first called Christians, and they began to celebrate on the seventh day of or on the first day of the week instead of the seventh day of the week, because again, Jesus that wouldn't rise on the Sabbath. That would be sacrilegious. So you had to go the next day.
Yeah, but more
when I was
the section
and when I was a kid, I thought Christians just had the days of the week like shifted one day, so they were like they thought creation finished on Sunday.
Yeah, they got confused. And they did use all the Sabbath rules to be like as miserable as possible, especially the Puritans. Oh my God, read Colonel Ingersoll about the frickin' misery that was Sundays. You couldn't laugh and you couldn't joke and you couldn't play games and you couldn't run around outside. You had to sit in your most uncomfortable clothes and read some god-awful on the atonement that's going to tell little boys how very, very much they deserve to burn in hell. And as he put it, I always thought the terms of the atonement would have to be rather broad to cover the case of a man who would write such a book for boys to read.
Makes one wonder how the witches of Salem were so bored that they had to play around and pretend that witches were there.
Speaking of which,
Speaking of which,
I do.
Speaking of which,
Yep.
Which is which?
Which?
Dad joke.
Which is which? I do have a class next semester that is about the Salem witch trials, which I'm very excited for. But I mentioned this before the show. I had a class that I was very excited for that got canceled because, as Tor pointed out, he was probably right that I was the only person that signed up for it. It was on Hittite myths and history, and that would have been.
See if he'll do it online. And I'm serious. I would take.
I'll go.
No, it was already canceled.
I'll take the course with you as well. I'm not even kidding about that. I love the stuff about the Hittites.
It's quite possible that the professor might be willing to do it as like an extracurricular. It wouldn't count for credits, but you could still learn.
No, as great as that would be, I kind of need the credits, so I need to.
Fair.
Yeah. the real Hittites or the fictional?
Well, let's discuss this because you're gonna need and want this for your future goals.
They're
anyway,
two different people.
Right.
Is there some way to negotiate with this guy that you could still do, let's say, an online course for this?
I guess I can email him and
then find out how many people we need. We will find the people to take that class. I will certainly take it with you. Lilith will as well.
Hair tights.
Yep. I got a couple comments. Thomas Shusheki for $4.99 says, "Wonder if this is where the Amish get shunning from."
I think that was from a little earlier. And there's a lot of cut off from your people talk that not just the Amish. Jehovah's Witnesses do the same thing.
Yeah.
Yes, they do.
Then Minute Rice offers $5 and says, "I think we need a break from this tax code." Aaron, what are you drinking today? Local brew, Revolver, American Ale, Blood and Honey, made with blood orange and actual honey.
Okay, I'll continue my commentary. Verses 18 to 19. Bamberger comments, these verses contain the only specific directions for animal sacrifice in this chapter. This list resembles that in Numbers in 28 to 26, but the two do not agree exactly. Another instance of variant traditions in P. The Sifra does not harmonize, but requires both sets of offerings. Those in Leviticus to accompany the loaves, those in Numbers as fixed festival sacrifices. Verse 24. Commemorated
this is
with
so typical. Like there's two that are almost identical but slightly variant, so they both happen, and I get twice as much.
What is Mary's father?
Yeah, of course. Even though it says Joseph's father. Well, yeah.
Even though it contains some names that are similar but not the same as well.
There's a lot of Marys.
Like we're not talking about Bill, we're talking about Bill.
Oh, good.
I get it. That's right.
Verse 24, commemorated with trumpet blasts. The Hebrew is Zicharon Tru'ah, which literally means memorial by blasting of the shofar. Levine comments, the sounding of horns had various functions in ancient Israel, as well as elsewhere in the ancient Near East. Usually, it was a method of assembling the people before moving on to a new location, or of mustering troops for battle. There were cultic uses as well. Horns were blasted when sacrifices were offered, and they were used by temple musicians. In our text, the horn was blasted to announce the forthcoming pilgrimage festival, which occurred 2 weeks after the first day of the month. Thus, we read in Psalms 81:4, literally, quote, blow the horn on the new moon, on the full moon for the day of our pilgrimage festival, end quote.
Yeah, it
Still
could have
makes-
been a general commemoration thing, right? Because like if you think about the conquest by Joshua.
Yeah,
and the horns.
that's exactly the first thing that jumped to mind. Joshua fought the battle of Jericho, and the walls came a-tumbling down.
Which was
Wasn't that with-
silly thing
Wasn't
going
that
around.
trumpets or shofars? I don't remember. Because it mentions
Pretty
both.
sure it was shofars. It was the ram's horn
okay.
trumpet. So
Oh, okay. Not metal ones. Okay.
Verse 34, Festival of Tabernacles. In Hebrew, it's Chag HaSukkot. JPS renders Sukkot as booths, and according to Bamberger, the rendering of tabernacles is both archaic and obscure. According to Levine, the name derives from the root samech chet chet, samech chaf chaf, not chet chet, to cover over, as would be said of branches, and it designates a small, often impermanent structure that is covered on top, but that may be only partially enclosed on its sides. And sorry.
I just want to, so Jews to this day celebrate Sukkot by building a sukkah, a booth, which always has no fixed roof. It has like, you just kind of put up 3 or 4 walls and then you cover it with foliage. And a lot of people also decorate them as well. And some communities will sleep for the 7 days in the booth.
The roof has branches of palm tree, I believe.
It doesn't matter the ingredient, the
lulav.
species.
no, but Christians totally stole that with the Palm Sunday thing and the palm fronds for Jesus and all of that.
Yeah. So
So,
then on the same festival they bring the full plants, which you'll get to. But yeah, they build the hut. Some communities will like sleep in it and like do everything in it, and some communities they just eat in them. And the community that I grew up, for example, won't even drink a cup of water, or at least outside the hut for that 7 days, which is very annoying if you're trying to organize family trips and the men are like, oh, we have to go somewhere where we can have a sukkah and drink.
For us, we just ate there.
Well,
special. Yeah. Verse 40. Branches from luxuriant trees. In Hebrew, it's Pri Etz Hadar. The exact identity of this plant species is not known. The word pri usually is read as fruit, and based on this, Milgrom offers 4 possible interpretations. 1, citron, or the Latin citrus medica, I believe, known by the Hebrew name etrog, as rendered by Targums and the Pshita. Nachmanides argues that etrog is derived from the assumed root resh gimel gimel, by which the Targums render the verb chamad, desire, i.e. the desirable fruit. 2, olive, based on the olive branches prescribed for the booths in Nehemiah 8:14. 3, hadar means the dar tree, and dar in Sanskrit is short for divdar, tree of div, which is a type of demon, and refers to the Himalayan cedar. And 4, any kind of majestic tree, as the Septuagint renders. Milgrom, however, prefers to read pri as branches. And finally, on the willows, Hebrew it's anaf etz avot. KJV reads boughs of thick trees, and JPS boughs of leafy trees. Chazal in the Sifra and Talmud Sukkah 32b identified it with the myrtle, in Hebrew hadas, mentioned in Isaiah 41:19. The term avot could either mean cordage, as seen in Exodus 28:14 and Judges 15 verses 30 to 14, or leafy, as seen in Ezekiel 6:13 and 20:28. Milgrom notes that Nehemiah mentions both alei hadas, myrtle leaves, and alei etz avot, leaves of a leafy tree, in Nehemiah 8:15, which indicates the possibility that both interpretations were already current in the 5th century BCE.
Possible. Definitely possible.
Yeah, so on the Festival of Booths, Jewish people will also take before the festival. They will prepare a palm branch, and normally they're very particular about. There's so many of these like really particular little OCD rules with this one. The palm branch has to be like completely unsplit, so it's like just like a stick, and like the leaves are all joined together. And then they will attach like 3 little branches of myrtle and 2 branches of willow, and then they will tie it up using rings made up of palm leaves. So they'll like take off a leaf and turn it into a ring and attach it. And some communities make like a whole little woven like basket that everything goes inside. It's quite interesting. And then separately they will take the etrog, the citrus, like it's like a yellow, looks a bit like a lemon, but it's a bit more like primitive looking. And they'll bring it all together, say the blessing, and then kind of shake it in all directions. And that's probably where the Christians got the Palm Sunday thing.
Did we finish?
Yes,
Chapter 23.
I did at least.
Okay.
Yeah, we finished. Oh,
Okay.
you finished, Summer? Okay. Cool.
Yes, I did.
We finished reading it. Yes.
Yeah, I just noticed that P-Town dropped out. Apparently, he zoned out. As
Yeah,
is
he zoned
typical.
out quite a while ago, but he never said anything, so I wasn't.
Yeah, didn't say a thing. So
He did say in chat, "Hi, atheists," or whatever it is he usually says, but that was the only thing I saw.
yeah. Okay. So are we moving on to 24?
Yes.
Because after all this
Oh,
tax
that's an
law,
interesting. That's
hold
an
on. Are
interesting
we?
chapter.
Hold on, guys. Are we sure we
Wait.
want to do that? Because, so if we do, we can, because we would have to split it really weirdly, because 24 and 20, we have 4 chapters left.
Yes.
So we can either split it 2 and 2, or we'd have to do 3 next time, and one of them is very long.
Well, let's have a
very
quick
long,
look.
but not
to-
but not that of importance as I've read.
Yeah, if we don't have that much time left, and it would be nice to. I kind of wanted to give like a TLDR of what we just read, and like kind of go
Okay.
over the calendar.
so you
a
want to
bit.
save this for Saturday?
I mean,
I think-
I would prefer that. I prefer to do 2 and 2.
Well, someone does
Plus, it
get
would give me a
stoned.
chance to get a couple things together. But...
I thought it would be.
So we all have to get out our weed and get stoned too.
Lawrence, I'm
Oh,
going to
different
follow
type of
your.
stoning. Right.
Solidarity,
I'm
I've
Brother.
already
Advice.
prepared something, but I can wait. But I can wait on that.
I mean,
Lawrence,
are you
whatever,
interested?
whatever you recommend, we'll go with that.
I mean, I think 2 and 2 would make the most sense. But like, I will go with consensus if people think that like 24 isn't like very long or anything.
Lawrence has spoken.
Praise be unto Lawrence.
God, that's
Hello,
creepy.
Lawrence.
That's not.
Hello.
I mean, is any? Are you guys interested in hearing about
TLDR?
the calendar, how it's structured?
Yeah.
Sure.
Yes, please.
Sure.
Okay, so the Jewish calendar and the Muslim calendar are lunar based. So every month is the word month comes from moon. It is an actual moon month. So the new moon is the beginning of the month. Full moon is the middle of the month, and that's a month. So if you were to make a calendar based on just lunar months, what would happen? Like the Muslim calendar, every year it would kind of move along, because if you take 12 lunar months, put them together, you don't get a solar year. It doesn't work. So the Muslim year kind of moves around the solar year. So Ramadan, which is one of their months, will fall at different seasons, depending on the year. It just cycles along. But in the Bible, it says that you have to. It says something about maybe the festival of unleavened bread, or maybe the Passover festival. It needs to be in spring. So the rabbis very early on took that as a thing, like we're going to have lunar months, but the festivals have to fall at the right time of the year every year. So what they do is they actually have to calculate mathematically a way of having your 12 months, but then to make a cycle that it more or less it's leap years, right? The civil year that we have has a leap day. We add a day every blah 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 based on
4
the
years,
difference.
February, yeah.
Because 365 days exactly is not exactly the same as a solar year. So we get an extra day every blah blah blah. In the Jewish calendar, you get an extra month every 4 years. And there's a whole calculation that goes into which years are lunar years and which are not. It's like a 19-year cycle or whatever. So they get a whole extra month that's added. So some years have 12 months, and it's 355 days, let's say, and some years have 13 months, so it's 385 days, or sometimes it's 386, 384, 354, 356.
What do you do with a leap month? Are there like special festivals you only have when you have the special leap month? Or
well, so the month that gets added it's called Adar Aleph, which means the first Adar. So it's actually added before the regular Adar, which is when Purim happens. So the date in the
so
first
that's the
Adar,
month you want to schedule your wedding if you want to celebrate fewer anniversaries.
Yeah, if you're born in a leap month, we make the joke like, "Oh, you're only 3 years old." You know, you've only had your birthday. So yeah, so it's both months have the same amount of days in them, I think. So like the day when Purim was supposed to happen is called like Small Purim, and people do stuff for it, but that's about it. It's just you just get an extra month of waiting before Purim and Passover.
That is the festival where you drink until you can't tell the difference between blessed as Mordecai and cursed as Haman, right?
Yeah, exactly. So
My
kind of
kind
the
of
end of
festival.
winter. It's a nice one to look forward to.
Yeah. And we need to get
and-
ratchets because that's a thing you
to
do
make
every time you mention
noises.
Haman. Yeah, every time you mention Haman, you have to use the ratchet.
Yeah.
To erase the name. I don't know.
Yeah. And another thing that's interesting here is it talks about the first month, the first month, the second, the seventh month. Actually, Judaism kind of has like 4 different ways of counting the year, and this is like the older system, which is called like the royal system, where Nisan, that when Passover happens in spring, is the beginning of the year. But Jews actually nowadays really celebrate the new year in September time, in this what's here is called the 7th month, like the festival of blowing the trumpet. That's Rosh Hashanah. That's the head of the year. So that's like a different year counting system, and I think that one's based on creation. Like the tradition is that creation was the last 5 days of year minus 1 or whatever.
Yeah, that's just. I'm sorry. It just makes me think of Usher, the bishop who calculated that world began. What was it? September the 24th at 9 o'clock in the morning.
On a Tuesday.
He wasn't the one that came up with the 9 a.m. That was some other guy that added on.
Okay. Still.
Yeah. So Jews have a very similar idea. Like creation was like 25th of Elul. Well, 1 year before the first Rosh Hashanah, which would have been 0. Not 1 year, 1 week before, which is 5,780 something years ago. Yeah. So
right,
so if you look at this list, it's kind of weird, where you have Passover, Shavuot, Festival of Weeks. Then it says Rosh Hashanah, which is the first day of the 7th month. 9th day of the 7th month is Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement, and then like a few days later you have another week-long festival, which is the one with the booths and the bringing the things together, and then you have like the last day is kind of like its own festival where you also kind of get drunk.
What's really incredible about that is, so because the Earth is less than 6,000 years old, obviously dinosaurs can't be real, and all fossils have been faked. Is that what I'm to understand?
I did it.
Depends on how ignorant you are. Like my dad would say, like he used to say. I think I've kind of brought him around to old Earth creationism. He would say like that fossils are, scientists have an agenda against God or whatever.
Yeah,
so
sounds about right.
Fossils and dinosaurs are just rubbish.
Obviously.
They don't really say like the devil put it there or testing our faith or anything like that. But I have brought a lot of religious people, well, not a lot, like 3, around to the idea that God created the world fully formed. If you cut down a tree on the first day, you would have had rings and it would have told you about the weather before creation. So why maybe God created the world with like an evolutionary history.
Oh yeah,
Um,
apparent age.
Same
thing,
thing
right?
with the distant starlight problem. Like the
Yeah,
young Earth
exactly.
creationists,
Lights
they
on the
bend over backwards to try to come up with explanations, and I've heard all kinds of crazy stuff from the speed of light is different in different directions, but only
Oh.
towards Earth.
we can't
Or
prove it's in the same that it's the
Yeah.
same speed in both
Yeah.
directions.
or God created everything 14 billion years ago, tucked Earth into a black hole, so time didn't pass until 6,000 years ago. He brought it out, so the Earth is actually 6,000 years old in a 14 billion year old universe. All kinds of crazy stuff.
Oh, man,
Anything
I
to
wish-
avoid reality.
I wished I had my jar of stuff where I could just pick all those cherries out, one
Mm-hmm.
at a time.
It's
Well, maybe
I
he
mean,
created.
That's
so many bingo
incredible.
cards worth
Yeah, so many.
of just reality denying craziness.
It's amazing the hoops that you have to go to
Yeah.
make all of this actually
It
make
is
sense.
funny though, because there are
Such
still
hoops.
trends in what I shall very generously call creationist thought. Because
It's
you
very
said, Isaac, that you never heard that the dinosaurs' bones were put in the earth by Satan to deceive us and test our faith.
Right, it's not a Jewish
But
idea.
yeah, no,
Yeah.
but and even among Christians, that is usually not propounded today. But if you go back to the
No.
1920s and you read both fiction and nonfiction, they were absolutely pushing for the consideration of such an idea. that-
I have a family member who literally told this to my face once.
Oh God.
Hmm.
Yes, and for the fear of family docs, I'm not going to say it in case anyone happens to watch this show. But I'll tell you guys
No,
after. It's,
yeah, it's oh God.
and,
which,
and
I
this
mean-
person was sincere.
God a liar, literally.
Yeah. So from the Jewish perspective, like old world creationism kind of fits in with the idea of God creates the world looking natural, so that you have that free choice to believe in Him or not. So, and since Satan is just like works for God, like you could say that he was the one who planned it all out and ended in like, yeah, let's put dinosaurs right here so people find it. He'll be the planner of who maybe, well, maybe it would be the Yetzer Hara, but they're kind of the same person. So.
Yes.
The angel who does the dirty work.
Isaac, were you ever a believer?
I think so. Yeah. Until I was about like 14, I was.
As
Probably
Carmen put
believe-
it, when
I-
you reached the age of reason.
I was a believer as well until 13, but I wasn't. But I was a master. I was a traditionalist. Like I wasn't like an orthodox. I was mainly like not doing any electricity in the Sabbath and stuff like that. Fasting on Yom Kippur, not eating chametz in Passover, stuff like that. But it wasn't.
But
I
did you
wasn't
believe?
religious.
Did you
I
like?
did
Did you
believe.
think that God was a real thing?
Yes, until
And,
like I think 13, where by my father and my father encouraged me to be more skeptical about religious claims, and
Good for your father.
yeah.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
think,
proper
Interesting.
I
opposite.
think I was
Mine.
either 12 or 13, but I distinctly remember watching Dillahunty, Dawkins, Aaron, those it was that, or who was the one
Wow.
at the time?
Hitchens.
Venom Fang X.
I will say that in Israel
don't think-
we had our own like atheist
Oh.
YouTubers, like Israeli YouTubers,
Mhm.
who are not active today, but are well known like in the atheist community.
Well,
the atheist community, quote unquote.
Yeah, you don't see a lot of the living dinosaur anymore. Every once in a while, he'll come out with a video. But I believe, wasn't he the one who made Venom Fang X give his infamous apology?
No, I think it
No,
was
that
Thunderfoot.
was my friend DPR Jones.
Yeah,
Right, of
Oh.
course it was
Yeah,
DPR
DPR Jones doesn't make videos anymore because he died a couple of years ago.
Oh.
But I mean, I've been to his. I've stayed at his house and he's stayed at mine. So I'm proud to say that he and I were friends.
Absolutely.
He was a lawyer in England, and he got Venom Fang X over a barrel with some of the claims that he had made, and forced him to read this huge, ridiculous retraction, which
and
which
go
is
off
wonderful.
on YouTube for a length of time to reflect on his actions.
There was
Yep.
a period of time where Venom Fang X's channel was ran by another guy. So it was pasty white dude, but he had gray hair, and I think he had a beard.
Gira.
Was that his name?
Gear Up. Yep.
Okay. Yeah. So that guy
And his sister Sable Chicken.
that guy messaged
No relation.
I was just
me
gonna say.
wanting to do a debate. God, what was it? It was back in the day. Holy shit. I was
Back in 2010.
that
Ooh.
was back in the day. I was a teenager. I was like 16.
Oh my God, you're
Oh,
a
shut
baby.
up, Lord, you young kid.
He was
Oh,
I
my
I was gonna
back
say, like, I
hurts
didn't have
saying that.
YouTube when I was 14.
Oh.
Like
Sir, you are a baby.
2000 and in 2005.
Well,
there was
let
no
Lawrence
YouTube.
tell his story.
Yeah.
No, that was it. He
Yeah.
messaged me wanting to do a debate, and I was like, "Oh, Venom Fang X," and I was like, "That's not Venom Fang X," and then I just didn't bother.
Yeah, Gear Up and I had an interaction, and that I greatly enjoyed that. Gear Up made an admission that I bring up a lot of people that when the believers, when they express that it's make believe, that they're pretending to believe something that they know is not actually factual true. They're trying to believe it anyway. And Gear Up made this admission a number of times on his channel. One of them was when he said he was trying to dispel the transitional fossil Eda for strepsirrhine, primates, and he said that one of the identifying characteristics was that it had a tooth comb, or that it didn't have a tooth comb, and if it was a true primate or a true strepsirrine, then it would have a tooth comb. And he said, but if you look at this up close and you use your imagination, you can imagine a tooth comb. Yeah, use your imagination, because it's all make believe. And Gear Up just flat out fucking admitted that. It's all pretend.
I think religion was always meant to be pretend. And in a certain context, pretend has value. As children, we learn how to do things by playing pretend. And as humans, we find meaning through, finding greater story arcs in the disparate acts in our lives. And
this may be difficult for you guys to understand, but I used to be a LARPer.
yeah.
I know how to pretend, but it was compartmentalized.
But they're not honest about it, and they can't be anymore because they're insisting that it's all literally true, and it's bad for you.
Well, here's kind of where I come from on this. So,
Aaron, where'd you go?
I studied a number of religious traditions, and it seems like it's less about the stories being literal and more about the principles or the underlying philosophies that are to be taken literally. So like you can that's why, like, I don't think the primordial narrative with Genesis 1 through 11, I don't think that narrative was meant to be taken literally, as in this literally happened. I think that they were referring to very real things happening in their time period, but telling it from a mythological ancient past, and thereby serving like either an ideological purpose or a moral one, perhaps. There are other reasons. Like sometimes, like you can have like an entirely like fictive one where it's like this is meant for entertainment. Jonah or Esther could have been that. So there are different reasons to write myths, and the problem comes when you fully take it at face value, completely literally. That is where we have an issue.
And I think that's one of the reasons I accuse Christians, especially the ones who are trying to, cast the devil out of me online, because that totally works. I just say, I don't agree to LARP with you. Go LARP elsewhere, because that's what it is. It's LARPing. And that's honestly fine. I don't have a problem. But like, have fun with your group of people who want to LARP that particular thing. Don't pretend it's real and drag the rest of us into it and threaten to take away our rights if we don't want to play with you.
The real pretense is the problem. If it was not for that and it was just LARPing or just acting, then that'd be harmful at all. It's just the fact that people actually think these things exist. I mean, it would be terrifying to me if, there were Harry Potter fans, for example. I'm sure there are who think that that's literal. And that bothers me, because it should be just have fun, dress up as a wizard, and get out, Vada Kedavra and kill your friends. I mean, no big deal, right?
So yeah, it could be like like if it was used as like a fun thing, that'd be different, right? Like, when I was a
Exactly.
kid, I believed that wrestling was real, but I was a kid. But now
Yes.
still
Still believe that it is real.
yeah, it's real. It's still real to me, damn it. And
Welcome to the world of madness.
the
Chicken.
thing is, like, now I just enjoy the show. I'm like, hey, this is great. This, some of the stuff that they do is very impressive. They could tell a very compelling story. Like, it's I think it's a magical form of theater, but like it's like I don't take it the same way I did when I was a child, thinking like, oh my god, the Undertaker is going to literally kill this person.
And and the part of the problem that a lot of us, especially ex-evangelicals, have is that we were raised in a group that deliberately took every possible action to methodically eradicate that point in our maturity where we would go, oh, okay, yeah, no, this isn't literally real. This is like a thing that we all do. Okay, that's cool. But just absolutely so many different manipulative thought processes and training processes in our to self-regulate our own thoughts to keep us like children. And
I've suddenly accrued a bunch of chats, so I'm going to read those. DQ said around the time of Leviticus in India, the culture was rejecting the cult of sacrifice and its focus on social order in favor of personal ascension and shramina, drop out and tune in. And then DQ adds, makes me wonder if the same struggles were going on in the Hebrew tradition, but the cult of sacrifice maintained dominance.
Possibly.
I mean, in Second Temple Judaism, we have the Pharisees versus Sadducees struggle, so that could be a similar.
Yeah, thanks.
Then Thomas,
in the Second Temple.
Yes.
Thomas Susheki offers $1.99 and says it's a morality myth.
Well,
Then Matt White says, at Lilith Liberated, fantasy may take you anywhere, but it exercises the muscle that will. Well, may not take you. What fantasy may not take you anywhere, but it exercises the muscle that will. Okay, gotcha. And that's a quote from Terry Pratchett.
Which is why I read your stories, but understand that they are stories.
Yeah.
read your Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. Always keep your towel on you.
I actually have a full copy. I actually have the full collection of the Hitchhiker's Guide in English.
Hitchhiker's Guide.
Excellent.
Nice. Yeah, and on this thing about make-believe, we know, I know that there are lots and lots of people, especially in this country, people who are crazy or stupid or misled or whatever the problem is, that actually believe in things like creationism and think there's legitimate truth to it. I've talked to many people who were former believers who really thought there was truth to that. But when you've had a couple of conversations with people like Ken Ham and Kent Hovind and so on, all of these evangelical, professional creationists, you realize that, oh yeah, you're full of shit. They know. They know exactly what lies they have to tell and at what cue. They know it's a sham.
Vested interests.
Very much.
Yeah, their fortunes depend on it. They gotta keep selling those DVDs.
Y'all remember Peter Popoff?
Exactly.
Oh no.
Even when the kid dies at your amusement park, you still got to be peddling those DVDs at the hospital.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So it's 7:00. We should close this up. We're going to do Leviticus 24.
It's gonna be
on
fun.
Saturday. What?
Yeah. It's gonna be fun because this is like an instance of a story in Leviticus, and it's about stoning somebody who blasphemed God. So it'll be
5
very
points.
interesting.
Everyone who comes stoned.
Sounds so fun.
Don't know
Challenge
if I can manage
accepted,
that
sir.
one.
That's right. It's not legal in Texas, is it?
No.
Of course not. You gotta come up to Washington
It
again.
wouldn't
It's more
matter if
fun
it
up
was
here.
legal marijuana. I've tried it. I didn't enjoy it. Wasn't a thing I got into. So it could be legal everywhere, and I wish that it was legal everywhere, but I wouldn't be imbibing anyway.
No worries.
Yeah, it's
Everybody
just,
has their thing.
yeah.
It's
One
definitely
last
better than
super chat.
tobacco.
I say Thomas Shuseki, $4.99. Says, "Oh God, the essay storylines and Lorence, I am old enough to live that WWF."
Yeah,
Wrestling Federation.
those if I'm those were not pleasant. I'm glad that era of wrestling is over.
By the way, there
Sexual.
is no law in Lorence.
No, it's spelled differently. Yeah, but
Yeah.
oh boy, yeah, some of those stories. Katie Vick. We hope to erase that from all of our collective memories one day.
Real quick, I
Benoit?
just I want to add something to you,
Benoit,
Tomer, when you said there's no law in Lawrence. That's right, because he's not a lawyer. But there is lore in Lawrence because he is a scholar.
Ooh.
There's
Maybe
also
she'll
Nice.
no in Lorence. And,
Nice.
Yeah, it's
Okay,
funny
let's
how the
finish this.
system works. You don't actually get that until you get the degree at the very end. But I was a long way away from that, and people were putting me on stage with legitimate fucking people, and I felt such imposter syndrome. I'm like, how do I even belong here? And the actual scholars were telling me, hey, you belong here. So that was a nice thing to hear.
Very
So,
nice.
yeah.
Keep reading, keep learning. Never stop.
All right, are we going to close out?
yes.
All right.
Hope so, because I have to get to work.
See you all on the weekend.
I have to
Okay,
go.
everybody.
Join the
Alright,
Discord.
Later.
Join the Discord.
See you,
See ya.
everybody.
See you on
Bye.
Saturday.